The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Sarah James clutched the worn leather reins, her knuckles white with determination. The wagon creaked beneath her, a final memento from a life she was leaving behind, just as she had buried her husband beneath the unforgiving soil of Illinois 3 months prior. April 1873 marked the beginning of Sarah's westward journey. At 26, she was neither young enough to easily rebuild her life nor old enough to resign herself to perpetual widowhood. The small trunk beside her contained all that remained of her former life: 2 dresses, a tattered Bible, her husband Thomas's pocket watch, and their wedding photograph, his kind eyes now faded along with the sepia tones of the image. "Just a bit farther, Maple," Sarah murmured to the exhausted mare pulling her wagon. The animal's once glossy coat was now dull with trail dust, much like Sarah's spirit after weeks of solitary travel across the endless plains. The wagon train she had joined in Missouri had disbanded at a fork in the trail 3 days prior, families splitting off toward different destinations. Sarah had chosen to continue alone toward Wyoming Territory, where land was said to be plentiful and opportunity beckoned to those brave enough to claim it. Night fell quickly on the plains, transforming the landscape into a sea of shadows. Sarah pulled her thin shawl tighter against the spring chill. Her supplies were dwindling dangerously low, 2 days of hardtack and dried beef at most, and Maple needed proper feed and rest. The animal's labored breathing concerned her deeply. In the distance, pinpricks of light emerged against the darkness. Sarah squinted, her heart quickening with hope. A settlement, perhaps, or at least a homestead where she might find temporary shelter. "Please," she whispered to whatever god might still be listening, "let them be kind people." As she approached, the lights revealed themselves to be lanterns illuminating a modest but well-maintained ranch house. A large barn stood nearby, and several outbuildings dotted the property. A wooden sign swung gently in the evening breeze: Monarch Ranch. Sarah guided Maple toward the ranch house, relief and apprehension battling within her chest. Her father had always warned her about the dangers of approaching strangers, especially in these untamed territories, but desperation had a way of quieting such cautions. Before she could reach the main house, the sound of hoofbeats approached from the darkness. Sarah froze, one hand instinctively reaching for the small pistol hidden beneath her seat, a parting gift from her father-in-law. "Who goes there?" a deep voice called out. A tall figure on horseback materialized from the shadows. The man's face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but even in the dim moonlight, Sarah could make out broad shoulders and a stance that suggested he was accustomed to handling trouble. "My name is Sarah James," she replied, willing strength into her voice despite her exhaustion. "I'm traveling to Wyoming Territory. My horse needs rest and I could use a meal and shelter if you'd be so kind. I can pay." The last part was a half-truth. She had precious little money left. The rider approached slowly, his horse's hooves crunching on the hard, packed earth. As he drew closer, lantern light from the house revealed a weathered face with piercing eyes that evaluated her with cautious curiosity. "Matthew Zanetti," he introduced himself, tipping his hat slightly. His voice was rough as trail gravel but not unkind. "This is my ranch. Wyoming's still a good 4 days' ride from here, madam, and your horse looks about done in." Sarah straightened her spine, summoning her remaining dignity. "I'm aware, Mr. Zanetti. I had planned to rest her at the next town, but I fear I've miscalculated the distance." Matthew studied her for a long moment, then glanced at her wagon and the exhausted mare. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Bentonville's another day's ride west," he said. "But it looks like you and your horse could both use more immediate attention." He paused, seeming to debate with himself. "I've got a spare room in the house and plenty of space in the stable. You're welcome to stay the night." Relief washed over Sarah, though she remained guarded. "That's most generous, Mr. Zanetti. I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition," he replied, already turning his horse toward the barn. "Follow me, we'll see to your mare first." Sarah clicked her tongue, urging Maple forward. The horse responded with obvious effort, each step clearly painful. The barn was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with neat rows of stalls, most occupied by horses whose curious faces appeared as they entered. The scent of hay and leather filled the air, oddly comforting after weeks on the dusty trail. Matthew dismounted in one fluid motion that spoke of years in the saddle. "Jeb," he called out, and a young boy of perhaps 16 appeared from one of the stalls. "We've got a visitor. Help Mrs. James with her horse and wagon." "Yes, sir," the boy replied, his curious gaze flickering over Sarah before he approached Maple with gentle hands. "Jeb's my ranch hand," Matthew explained. "Been with me 3 years now. He has a way with horses." The boy was already examining Maple's legs and hooves with practiced efficiency. "She's got stone bruising on her front right," he reported. "Nothing that won't heal with rest and proper care, but she shouldn't be pulling any weight for at least a week." A week. Sarah's heart sank. A week of delay meant a week of supplies she couldn't afford, and the Wyoming homestead claims she sought might be taken by then. Matthew seemed to read her thoughts. "Don't fret about that now," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Let's get you inside. Looks like you could use a hot meal as much as your horse needs rest." He led her toward the ranch house, a solid structure built from local timber and stone. The front porch was swept clean, with 2 rocking chairs suggesting peaceful evenings watching the sunset, a luxury Sarah hadn't experienced since Thomas fell ill. The interior of the house was surprisingly well kept for a bachelor's residence. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, with comfortable-looking furniture arranged around it. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that spoke of an educated mind. "Have a seat," Matthew instructed, gesturing toward the table while he moved to stoke the fire. "Martha will be back shortly. She's down at the creek washing up after supper." "Martha?" Sarah questioned, suddenly wondering if she had misunderstood his situation. "My housekeeper," he clarified, "and cook, lives in the small cabin behind the house with her husband, Roy. They keep things running smoothly inside while I handle the ranch." The mention of staff suggested prosperity, making Sarah more conscious of her dusty appearance and limited means. She smoothed her travel-wrinkled skirt self-consciously. The door opened, admitting a stout woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and rosy cheeks. She stopped short at the sight of Sarah. "Well now, who do we have here?" she asked, her tone curious but welcoming. Matthew made the introductions. "Mrs. James is traveling to Wyoming Territory. Her horse needs rest, so she'll be staying the night." Martha's eyes softened as she took in Sarah's exhausted appearance. Without being asked, she moved to the stove where a pot simmered. "You look like you could use a proper meal, dear. I've got stew that can be heated in no time." "That's very kind," Sarah replied, her stomach growling in anticipation. "I don't wish to be a bother." Martha waved away her concerns. "No bother at all. It's nice to have another woman around." She gave Matthew a pointed look. "The men outnumber us considerably around here." As Martha busied herself with preparing the meal, Sarah became aware of Matthew studying her. His gaze wasn't improper, merely thoughtful, as if trying to piece together her story. "Wyoming's rough country for a woman alone," he finally said. "What draws you there?" Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to share with this stranger, yet something in his direct manner invited honesty. "My husband died this past winter. Pneumonia. We had a small farm in Illinois, but without him." She trailed off, the memory still raw. "There's nothing left for me there. I heard the territory government is offering land parcels. A fresh start." Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. "A brave decision, or a foolish one," Sarah replied with a tired smile. "As Jeb pointed out, my planning hasn't been entirely sound." The aroma of Martha's stew filled the room as she placed a steaming bowl before Sarah along with a chunk of fresh bread. "Eat now, talk later," the older woman instructed. "Everything looks clearer on a full stomach." Sarah didn't need to be told twice. The stew was rich with beef and vegetables, the first fresh food she'd tasted in weeks. Each spoonful seemed to restore a bit of her strength. As she ate, she became aware of the quiet efficiency with which the household ran. Martha moved about the kitchen with purpose, while Matthew reviewed what appeared to be ledgers at the far end of the table. There was something reassuring about their routine, a stability Sarah had sorely missed since Thomas's death. How many head of cattle do you run, Mr. Zanetti? She asked, attempting conversation to distract from her ravenous appetite. Matthew glanced up from his figures. About 500 at present. Started with 50 when I came here 10 years ago. From where, if I may ask? Boston, originally, he replied, surprising her. My father was a shipping merchant. I was expected to join the family business, but I had different ideas. Sarah could imagine a younger Matthew rebelling against the confines of Eastern society. His weathered face and calloused hands spoke of years of physical labor, yet his speech and the books lining his shelves hinted at his educated background. And you built all this yourself? A shadow crossed his features. Not alone, initially. My wife, Alina, and I came west together. He paused, and Sarah felt a kinship in the grief that briefly darkened his eyes. Yellow fever took her and our infant son 8 years ago. I'm sorry, Sarah said softly, the words inadequate but heartfelt. Loss leaves a hollow that's hard to fill. That it does, Mrs. James, he agreed, then deliberately lightened his tone. But life continues. The ranch has grown. We supply beef to Fort Laramie and the surrounding settlements. Martha, who had been quietly working nearby, interjected. What Mr. Zanetti isn't telling you is that Monarch Ranch is the most successful operation in the county, and he employs half the men in Bentonville at fair wages when other ranchers would work them to death for pennies. Matthew looked uncomfortable with the praise. Martha exaggerates. I do not, the older woman insisted, turning to Sarah. 4 of the homesteads around here would have failed if not for his help with stock and supplies during hard times. Sarah recognized the familiar discomfort of a good man being praised. Thomas had been the same generous without seeking acknowledgement. The comparison brought both pain and a curious comfort. After the meal, Martha showed Sarah to a small but comfortable bedroom. The washroom is through that door, she explained. I've laid out towels and soap. There's hot water in the copper boiler. The prospect of a proper bath after weeks of creek washing was almost overwhelming. Thank you, Martha. Your kindness means more than I can express. The older woman patted her hand. Rest well, dear. Things often look brighter in the morning light. Left alone, Sarah sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. What had started as another grueling leg of her journey had led her here to unexpected comfort and kindness. Yet tomorrow would bring new decisions. Maple needed a week's recovery, but Sarah's meager funds wouldn't stretch to cover room and board for that long, even if Matthew Zanetti were willing to host her. The warm bath eased her aching muscles, and clean clothing, even if it was one of her 2 increasingly worn dresses, restored a measure of dignity. As she braided her damp auburn hair, Sarah caught her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman who looked back at her seemed both familiar and strange thinner, certainly with new lines of worry at the corners of her eyes, but perhaps also stronger than she had been when leaving Illinois. One day at a time, she whispered to herself, an adage her mother had repeated through every hardship. It had gotten Sarah this far, it would have to carry her forward. Morning arrived with the sounds of a working ranch roosters crowing, cattle lowing in distant pastures, and men's voices calling to one another as they began their day's labor. Sarah dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where Martha was already preparing breakfast. Good morning, dear, the housekeeper greeted her. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in months, Sarah admitted. May I help with anything? Martha handed her a basket. You could gather eggs if you're willing. The henhouse is just behind the kitchen garden. Grateful for the chance to contribute, Sarah stepped outside into the clear morning air. The ranch looked even more impressive in daylight, well-maintained buildings, neat fences, and rolling pasture land stretching toward distant hills. A dozen or so men were already at work in the corrals, their movements purposeful under the direction of a foreman. The henhouse yielded a bounty of fresh eggs, and Sarah returned to find Matthew at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand as he discussed the day's work with a gray-haired man she hadn't met. Ah, Mrs. James, Matthew greeted her. This is Roy, Martha's husband and my foreman. The older man tipped his hat. Madam, hope you rested well. I did, thank you, Sarah replied, setting down the egg basket. Your ranch is impressive, Mr. Zanetti. A hint of pride crossed Matthew's face. "It's taken years of hard work. We've been fortunate." "And stubborn," Roy added with a good-natured grin. "Never seen a man more determined to make something succeed." Breakfast was a hearty affair of eggs, bacon, and biscuits served with fresh butter and preserves. As they ate, Matthew addressed the question Sarah had been avoiding. "I spoke with Jeb this morning about your mare," he said. "His assessment stands she needs at least a week off the traces, maybe more." Sarah set down her fork. "I appreciate your hospitality, Mr. Zanetti, but I can't impose for that long. Perhaps there's a livery in Bentonville where I could board her while I find work to cover the expense." Matthew exchanged a glance with Martha before responding. "There is, but good help is hard to find around here. Martha's been saying she could use an extra pair of hands, what with spring cleaning and the garden needing attention." Martha nodded enthusiastically. "Indeed I could. And with the cattle drive preparations starting next week, I'll be cooking for 20 men instead of our usual crew." Sarah hesitated. The offer was generous, perhaps too generous. "Are you suggesting I work in exchange for my stay?" "And fair wages besides," Matthew confirmed. "We'd provide room and board for you and care for your horse. In return, you'd help Martha with household duties and the cooking. When your mare is fit to travel, you'd have earned enough to continue your journey with proper supplies." The arrangement made practical sense, yet Sarah sensed there was more to it than simple economics. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Matthew's expression grew serious. "Because I've seen too many people fail out here for lack of timely help. The West doesn't forgive poor preparation, Mrs. James. Your determination is admirable, but reaching Wyoming with an injured horse and depleted supplies would be starting your new life at a disadvantage." His assessment was blunt but accurate. Sarah had known her resources were stretched thin, but hearing it stated so plainly brought home the precariousness of her situation. "Besides," Martha added gently, "you mentioned you were a farmer's wife. I imagine you know your way around a kitchen garden and a cook stove." "I do," Sarah acknowledged. During Thomas's illness, she had managed their small farm almost single-handedly, "and I'm not afraid of hard work." "Then it's settled," Matthew said, rising from the table. "Stay until your horse is sound and your supplies replenished. The Wyoming Territory will still be there in a few weeks." After he and Roy departed to oversee the morning's ranch operations, Sarah helped Martha clear the breakfast dishes. "He's a good man," Martha said, nodding toward the door Matthew had exited. "Lost too much, too young, but it didn't harden his heart like it does some." Sarah considered this as she dried a plate. "How long have you and Roy worked for him?" "Going on 7 years now. We came west from Kansas after our children were grown. Roy was looking for ranch work, and I've always enjoyed keeping a house in order." Martha smiled reflectively. "Mr. Zanetti needed more than a housekeeper back then. The place was in disarray after he lost Eleanor. Man was barely eating, working himself to exhaustion. Took months before he seemed truly present again." Sarah recognized the pattern of grief she'd traveled that road herself. "It changes you," she said quietly, "even when you find your way forward." Martha studied her with kind eyes. "That it does, dear, but sometimes those changes make room for new beginnings." The days fell into a rhythm that Sarah found unexpectedly comforting. Mornings began early with breakfast preparation for the ranch hands, followed by household tasks. Afternoons often found her in Martha's expansive kitchen garden, coaxing spring vegetables from the soil. The physical labor was therapeutic, giving her tired mind rest from the constant worry that had been her companion since Thomas's death. Each day she visited Maple in the barn, where Jeb was providing attentive care. The mare's condition improved steadily, though the boy remained firm that she needed full rest. "Horse like this deserves better than being worked to death," he told Sarah on her 3rd day. "She's got good lines, probably from decent stock, before she ended up pulling your wagon." "She was a riding horse on our farm," Sarah explained. "Thomas, my husband, bought her as a colt. I never intended for her to become a draft animal, but circumstances change." Jeb nodded with wisdom beyond his years. "Life's like that, madam, but sometimes changes turn out better than expected." His words lingered in her mind as she walked back to the house. Was this unexpected detour a setback or something more beneficial? For the first time in months, she felt something like peace. Matthew Zanetti remained something of an enigma. He was often absent during daylight hours, overseeing various aspects of the ranch operation, but joined the household for evening meals. His conversation was thoughtful and educated, revealing a mind that remained engaged with the wider world despite the ranch's relative isolation. Books and newspapers arrived regularly from Denver and even Chicago, and Sarah sometimes found him reading by lamplight late into the evening. On her fifth night at Monarch Ranch, Sarah joined him on the porch after dinner. The spring air was cool but pleasant, fragrant with blooming wildflowers from the nearby meadow. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The East, I mean." Matthew considered the question, his profile strong against the darkening sky. "Parts of it, the libraries, the music, my mother's garden in spring." He turned to look at her. "But I never belonged there, not really. I was always searching for something broader, more honest." "And you found it here." "I found the possibility of it," he corrected. "The chance to build something meaningful on my own terms." Sarah nodded, understanding the distinction. "Thomas and I had similar dreams for our farm. It was modest compared to this, but it was ours. We planned to expand, maybe plant an orchard." She smiled at the memory. "He had a weakness for fresh peaches." "What will you plant in Wyoming?" Matthew asked. The question gave her pause. She had been so focused on securing land that she'd given little thought to what she would do with it beyond basic survival. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Whatever will grow in that climate, I suppose. I'll need to learn the land first." "Wise approach," he approved. Too many newcomers try to impose their expectations rather than working with what the territory offers. Their conversation drifted to practical matters of Western agriculture, with Matthew sharing insights gained through his years of ranching. Sarah found herself taking mental notes, appreciating his knowledge and his willingness to share it without condescension. As the stars emerged overhead, a comfortable silence fell between them. It struck Sarah that this was the first truly peaceful evening she had experienced since Thomas fell ill, a realization that brought both gratitude and a pang of guilt, as if she were somehow betraying her husband's memory by finding moments of contentment in his absence. "It gets easier," Matthew said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Not forgetting, never that, but living alongside the memory instead of drowning in it." Sarah glanced at him, surprised by his perception. "Does it? Sometimes I wonder." "I wondered too," he admitted. "For years. There were days I thought I'd made a mistake trying to continue here, surrounded by the life Alina and I had planned together." He gazed out at his ranch, now silvered by moonlight. "But gradually, I realized that honoring what we built meant allowing it to grow and change, not preserving it in amber." His words resonated deeply. Wasn't that what she was attempting with her journey west? Not replacing the life she had lost, but building something new that honored Thomas's memory while allowing her to continue living. "Thank you," she said simply. Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's late. I should let you rest. Martha has plans for spring cleaning the pantry tomorrow, and I hear that's quite the undertaking." Sarah laughed, grateful for the lightened mood. "She's mentioned it 3 times today. I believe the phrase 'organized within an inch of its life' was used." His answering smile transformed his features, erasing years of worry lines. "Martha's enthusiasm for order is legendary. I've learned not to interfere with her systems." "Wise man," Sarah replied, rising from her chair. "Good night, Mr. Zanetti." "Matthew," he corrected. "I think we've moved beyond formalities, don't you?" The invitation to familiarity was offered casually, yet Sarah sensed its significance. "Good night, Matthew," she amended, "and thank you for the conversation." "The pleasure was mine, Sarah." As she retired to her room, Sarah found herself considering the ranch owner with new perspective. Beyond his role as her benefactor, she was beginning to see Matthew Zanetti as a man complex, thoughtful, carrying his own scars but not defined by them. The realization was unsettling in ways she wasn't prepared to examine too closely. The following days brought increasing involvement in ranch life. Sarah's assistance in the kitchen proved valuable as preparations for the upcoming cattle drive intensified. Additional hands arrived from Bentonville, swelling the number of hungry men requiring meals. She discovered she had a talent for organizing the large-scale cooking operation, freeing Martha to focus on her exceptional baking. "You're a godsend," Martha declared on the 10th day, as Sarah efficiently managed 3 large pots of stew while simultaneously directing 2 young kitchen helpers. "I haven't had this much help since Eleanor was alive." The comparison gave Sarah pause. "Were you close to her, Eleanor?" Martha nodded, her expression softening. "She was like a daughter to me, bright, determined woman had to be to convince a Boston shipping heir to start ranching in Wyoming Territory." She chuckled at the memory. Matthew would have followed her anywhere, but it was her idea to build this place. She had the vision. "She sounds remarkable," Sarah said, trying to imagine the woman who had shaped Monarch Ranch and Matthew so profoundly. "She was," Martha agreed, "and she would approve of how you've stepped in here." Eleanor believed in helping others find their footing. The conversation left Sarah feeling both honored and slightly uncomfortable, as if she were being measured against a beloved ghost. Yet Martha's matter-of-fact acceptance suggested the older woman saw no conflict in finding value in both the memory of Eleanor and the contributions of a new arrival. That evening, Sarah sought out Jeb to check on Maple's progress. She found the young ranch hand brushing the mare with careful attention. "She's doing much better, Mrs. James," he reported. "The swelling's gone completely, and she's putting full weight on that leg now." Sarah ran a hand over Maple's neck, noting the improved shine to her coat and the alertness in her eyes. "You've worked wonders with her." Jeb ducked his head, pleased but embarrassed by the praise. "Just gave her what she needed: good feed, rest, and a bit of care." He hesitated, then added, "Mr. Zanetti says I should start exercising her lightly tomorrow. Just walking at first, then maybe a little trotting if she handles it well." "That's wonderful news," Sarah said, though she felt a curious reluctance at the reminder that her stay at Monarch Ranch was temporary. "I appreciate all you've done, Jeb." The boy nodded, then asked with unexpected directness, "Are you really set on going to Wyoming, madam?" "Seems like you fit in right well here." The question caught her off guard. "Aye, that's the plan I made," she replied, unsure why she suddenly felt defensive about her carefully laid course. Jeb shrugged. "Plans change sometimes. Mr. Zanetti was headed to California when he first came west. Met Mrs. Eleanor in St. Louis and ended up here instead." He grinned. "Life's funny that way." Sarah pondered the young ranch hand's words as she walked back to the house in the fading light. She had committed herself to the Wyoming claim, had spent nearly everything she possessed getting this far. Yet the thought of leaving Monarch Ranch created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. "It's just gratitude," she told herself firmly. "Appreciation for the kindness shown when I needed it most. Nothing more." But as she rounded the corner of the house, she caught sight of Matthew on the porch, deep in conversation with Roy about some ranch matter. The setting sun caught in his dark hair, now hatless, and illuminated the strong lines of his profile. Sarah found herself pausing, struck by the tableau of a man fully in his element, confident, capable, at home in the world he had built. Something stirred within her, an awareness she had thought buried with Thomas. The realization was both frightening and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of an unexplored territory. Matthew looked up then, catching sight of her. His serious expression softened into a smile that transformed his features. "Sarah," he called, "join us. Roy's been explaining why we need to reroute the North Pasture Creek before summer. I could use a practical mind to counter his engineering ambitions." Roy huffed in mock offense. "Just because a man wants to build a proper water management system instead of piling up rocks and hoping for the best." Their good-natured bickering made Sarah laugh as she climbed the porch steps. "I'm afraid my experience is limited to farm irrigation rather than ranch waterworks." "That's precisely the perspective we need," Matthew insisted, pulling up a chair for her. "Fresh eyes see what those of us too close to a problem might miss." The discussion that followed was lively and engaging, with Roy sketching plans in the dirt with a stick, while Matthew and Sarah offered suggestions and questions. Sarah found herself fully absorbed, offering insights from her farming experience that seemed to genuinely impress both men. "You've got a good mind for this work," Matthew told her as they finally concluded their planning session. practical but innovative. His approval warmed her in ways that went beyond simple pride in her contributions. My father believed in teaching his daughters to think, not just to keep house. It scandalized my mother's friends, but it served us well on the farm. A wise man, your father, Matthew observed. Too many talents are wasted because of narrow ideas about women's capabilities. In the soft evening light, with the scent of spring blossoms carrying on the breeze, Sarah felt a connection forming between them, tentative but undeniable. She wondered if Matthew felt it too, this quiet resonance that seemed to deepen with each conversation. The question lingered in her mind as she prepared for bed that night. What was she doing, allowing these feelings to develop when her path led elsewhere? Yet try as she might, Sarah couldn't regret the growing attachment. After months of numbness and grief, the awakening of her heart felt like the first green shoots breaking through winter soil, fragile but vital, a sign of life continuing. The following morning brought a flurry of activity as the final preparations for the cattle drive commenced. Sarah found herself busier than ever, helping Martha prepare travel rations for the men who would be accompanying the herd to the railway junction 50 miles east. Mr. Zanetti always leads the drive himself, Martha explained as they packed dried beef and hardtack into muslin bags. Says a man shouldn't ask his workers to do what he won't. They'll be gone nearly 2 weeks, what with the journey there and back. The news that Matthew would be leaving so soon caught Sarah by surprise. 2 weeks, she echoed, trying to mask her disappointment. Martha gave her a knowing look. The ranch will seem quiet with half the men gone, but there's plenty to keep us occupied. And Roy stays behind to oversee things here. Sarah nodded, focusing on her task to hide the confusion of emotions Martha's words had triggered. Why should Matthew's temporary absence affect her so strongly? She herself would be leaving soon. Maple was improving daily. The day passed in a whirlwind of activity, with Sarah seeing Matthew only in passing as he moved between the corrals and the barn, deep in discussion with his foreman about the drive. By evening, the ranch hummed with anticipation of the following day's departure. After the evening meal, which had been a boisterous affair with the men in high spirits, Sarah found herself drawn once again to the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamond dust. The beauty of it caught at her heart, this vast country that had taken so much from her, yet offered such moments of transcendent peace. It never gets old, does it? Matthew's voice came from behind her. Sarah turned to find him standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the warm light from within. Never, she agreed. In Illinois, the trees often blocked the horizon. Here it feels limitless. He joined her at the porch railing, close enough that she could sense his presence but not so near as to be improper. That's what captured me when I first came west, the sense of possibility, as if a person could reinvent themselves beneath a sky this vast. Is that what you did? Reinvent yourself, Matthew considered the question. In some ways, or perhaps I discovered who I already was beneath the expectations others had placed on me. He glanced at her. What about you, Sarah? Is Wyoming about reinvention or discovery? The question struck at the heart of her journey in ways she hadn't fully articulated even to herself. Both, I think. I can't go back to being who I was before Thomas died. That woman is gone just as surely as he is. She took a deep breath, finding surprising relief in speaking the truth aloud. But I'm not certain yet who I'm becoming. I just know I need to build something of my own. Matthew nodded slowly. A worthy goal and a brave one. They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, watching the stars. Sarah was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the subtle scent of leather and soap, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way his hands rested on the porch rail, strong and capable. I'll be leaving tomorrow with the drive, he finally said, breaking the silence. We should return in about 12 days, weather permitting. So Martha mentioned, Sarah replied. It sounds like quite an undertaking. Necessary, but not my favorite part of ranching, he admitted. I prefer the building to the selling. He turned to face her fully. Your mare is improving well. Jeb says another week of light exercise should have her ready for travel. The reminder of her impending departure created a tightness in Sarah's chest. Yes, he told me. I'm grateful for all the care she's received. Matthew hesitated, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. I've been thinking about your plans, he said. The Wyoming Territory is opening up, certainly, but homesteading alone is a hard road, especially for someone starting with limited resources. Sarah stiffened slightly. I'm not afraid of hard work, Matthew. I know that, he assured her quickly. Your industry these past weeks has been remarkable. That's not my concern. He paused, then continued more deliberately. What I'm trying to say not very well, it seems, is that there are opportunities here in Colorado as well. Land that could be developed, communities being established. Sarah studied his face in the moonlight, trying to understand the direction of his thoughts. Are you suggesting I change my destination? I'm suggesting you consider your options, he replied. The ranch has prospered. I've acquired adjacent parcels over the years, some of which remain undeveloped. There's a tract to the east with good water access that would make excellent farmland. The implication of his words began to dawn on her. Matthew, are you offering me land? His expression grew more earnest. I'm offering a possibility, Sarah. You've brought something to Monarch Ranch these past weeks, a spirit, an energy that's been missing. I've watched you work alongside Martha, contribute ideas, connect with everyone from Jeb to the newest ranch hand. He took a deep breath. I'm not proposing charity. Any arrangement would be fair, a partnership of sorts. A partnership, Sarah repeated, her mind racing. To start with, Matthew said, his voice softer now, with perhaps the potential for more in time, if that were something you might consider. The meaning behind his careful words sent a flutter through Sarah's chest. This was more than a business proposition. It was the tentative opening of a door to a future she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. This is unexpected, she managed, aware of the inadequacy of her response. Matthew nodded, accepting her confusion without pressing. I don't expect an answer now. It's a significant decision, and you've already set your course for Wyoming. He straightened, preparing to leave her to her thoughts. Just know that when I return from the cattle drive, there's a place for you here if you want it. No obligation, no pressure, just a possibility. With that, he bid her good night and returned to the house, leaving Sarah alone with a whirlwind of emotions beneath the vast Colorado sky. The cattle drive departed at dawn, with 50 men moving nearly 500 head of cattle eastward. Sarah rose early to help Martha prepare a hearty breakfast for the departing cowboys, but in the bustling activity, she had little opportunity for private conversation with Matthew. Their exchange was limited to a brief farewell as he mounted his horse to take his position at the head of the drive. Safe journey, Sarah told him, standing in the yard as the ranch hands made their final preparations. Matthew looked down at her from his saddle, his expression conveying more than his words could in such a public moment. Think about what I said, he replied quietly. No matter your decision, I'll respect it. With a tip of his hat, he turned his horse and rode out, calling orders to his men as the massive herd began its slow progress across the grassland. Sarah watched until the dust cloud raised by hundreds of hooves faded into the distance, her heart a confusion of hope, fear, and unexpected longing. The days that followed were quieter but no less busy. With half the ranch hands gone, those remaining worked longer hours. Sarah found herself taking on additional responsibilities, helping Roy organize supplies and even assisting with accounts when it was discovered she had a head for figures. Each evening, she spent time with Maple, now recovered enough for short rides around the ranch perimeter. Jeb's expert care had restored the mare to health, her coat gleaming and her step lively. She's ready whenever you are, Mrs. James, Jeb told her on the 7th day after the drive's departure. Fit for the trail now. Sarah stroked Maple's velvet nose, considering her options. Her original plan had been to continue to Wyoming as soon as her horse was sound. The land claims there represented the independence she had been seeking, a place truly her own, beholden to no one. Yet Matthew's offer had introduced a new possibility, one that grew more appealing each day she spent at Monarch Ranch. Here was established infrastructure, community, and the support she would need to truly succeed. And there was Matthew himself, a man she had come to admire deeply, whose quiet strength and thoughtfulness had begun to heal places in her heart she had thought permanently broken. Still planning on Wyoming? Martha asked that evening as they prepared supper for the remaining ranch hands. Sarah looked up from the bread dough she was kneading. "I'm not certain anymore," she admitted. "When I set out from Illinois, it seemed so clear. Now," Martha nodded understandingly. "Life has a way of changing our carefully laid plans." She checked the stew simmering on the stove before continuing. "I've known Matthew Zanetti for 7 years. In all that time, I've never seen him look at any woman the way he looks at you." The simple statement sent warmth spreading through Sarah's chest. "He's a good man," she said softly. "One of the best," Martha agreed. "And a lonely one, though he'd never admit it. Built this ranch into something remarkable, but a successful business doesn't warm your bed at night or share your joys and sorrows." "It's been less than a year since Thomas died," Sarah pointed out, voicing the concern that had been nagging at her. "Isn't it? Disloyal to consider another attachment so soon?" Martha's expression softened with compassion. "My dear, loyalty to the dead shouldn't mean denying life to the living." "Your husband loved you, didn't he?" "With all his heart," Sarah confirmed, throat tightening at the memory. "Then would he want you to walk a harder road alone when there's a chance for companionship and support? Would you have wanted that for him had your positions been reversed?" The question struck Sarah forcefully. Would she have wanted Thomas to live out his days in solitary grief if she had been the one to die? The answer came with surprising clarity. No, she would have wanted him to find happiness again, to build a life with purpose and, yes, even love. "I need to be certain," Sarah said after a long moment, "that I'm choosing a future here because it's right, not because it's easier than continuing alone." Martha patted her arm. "Wisdom beyond your years, my dear. Take the time you need. The right decision will become clear." 3 more days passed, days in which Sarah found herself increasingly involved in the daily workings of Monarch Ranch. She rode out with Roy to inspect the north pasture irrigation, offered suggestions for improving the kitchen garden's yield, and even helped deliver a foal when one of the mares went into labor unexpectedly. With each task, she felt more connected to this place and its people. On the evening of the 11th day, after the cattle drive's departure one day before Matthew's expected return, Sarah made her decision. The clarity came as she stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in hues of gold and crimson. This land had begun to feel like home in ways Wyoming unseen and unknown could not. And Matthew Zanetti had awakened feelings she had thought buried with Thomas, not replacing those memories, but creating something new alongside them. She would stay, at least long enough to explore the possibility Matthew had offered. Not just the land, but the partnership and perhaps, in time, something deeper. With her mind made up, a sense of peace settled over Sarah. Tomorrow, Matthew would return, and they would begin the conversation about their future. The thought brought not anxiety but anticipation, a fluttering hopefulness she had not expected to feel again. Dawn broke with a perfect clarity that seemed to mirror Sarah's resolved heart. She rose early, wanting to help prepare for the returning men. Martha had planned a feast to welcome them home, and the kitchen was soon filled with the aromas of roasting meat and baking bread. Mid-morning, however, brought an unexpected interruption. The sound of a horse approaching at speed drew Sarah to the front door. A young ranch hand one who had remained behind during the drive was galloping toward the house, his expression urgent. "Roy," the boy shouted as he reined in his lathered horse. "Riders coming, looks like Whitman and his boys." Roy emerged from the barn, his face grim. "How many?" 8, maybe 10. Armed, Sarah looked between them, confusion giving way to alarm at their expressions. "Who is Whitman?" "Jasper Whitman," Roy explained tersely. "Owns the Broken Spur Ranch north of here. Been trying to push us off our water rights for years. Matthew won the last court case against him 6 months ago." He squinted toward the horizon, where a dust cloud was now visible. "Picking his moment with Matthew and half our men away. What does he want?" Sarah asked, fear tightening her chest. "Trouble," Roy said grimly. "Martha, get inside and bring out the rifles. Jeb, round up the men. We've got 5 hands still here, right?" 4, the boy corrected. "Carson's laid up with that broken ankle." Roy nodded, quickly assessing their situation. "Sarah, you should stay in the house with Martha." But Sarah shook her head, thinking of all this ranch meant to Matthew and now to her. "I can shoot," she said firmly. "My father made sure of that, and Thomas insisted I maintain the skill on the farm." Roy hesitated, then gave a curt nod. "We'll need every capable hand, but stay back unless there's no choice." The approaching riders soon materialized from the dust, hard-faced men led by a tall figure on a black horse. They pulled up some 50 yards from the ranch house, where Roy and the available hands had formed a defensive line. "That's close enough, Whitman," Roy called out. "State your business and be on your way." The man on the black horse smiled without warmth. "Just being neighborly, Baxter. Heard Zanetti was away selling cattle, thought his property might need looking after." "We're managing fine," Roy replied evenly. "Nothing here that concerns you." Whitman's gaze swept over the ranch buildings before settling on Sarah, who stood on the porch with a rifle in her hands. "New addition to Zanetti's household, man works fast." His tone made the insinuation clear, and Sarah felt a flush of anger. "Mrs. James is our guest," Martha said sharply, emerging from the house with another rifle. "And you are not welcome here, Jasper Whitman." Whitman ignored her, continuing to address Roy. "I've come about the water rights. That creek Zanetti diverted belongs to me by natural flow. Judge Wilson might have ruled otherwise, but judges can be mistaken." "The law decided," Roy stated firmly. "The water rights belong to Monarch Ranch, nothing more to discuss." A dangerous smile spread across Whitman's face. "I disagree. In fact, I'm thinking it might be time to correct the situation directly. Zanetti's not here to stop us, and you're outnumbered." As if to emphasize the point, his men spread out slightly, hands hovering near their weapons. Sarah tightened her grip on her rifle, heart pounding but determined not to show fear. "You start trouble here, and you'll have the law down on you before sundown," Roy warned. "Sheriff Collins doesn't take kindly to range wars." "Sheriff's 3 days ride away investigating those stagecoach robberies," Whitman countered. "Plenty of time to re-establish the natural order of things." The tension in the air was palpable, a gathering storm about to break. Sarah could see Roy calculating their odds: 5 defenders against 9 attackers, with the women and Jeb included in their count. Before the situation could deteriorate further, however, the distant sound of hoofbeats drew everyone's attention. From the east came riders, a dozen or more, moving at speed toward the ranch. "Expecting company, Baxter?" Whitman asked, his confidence faltering slightly. Roy squinted against the sun, then broke into a broad grin. "As a matter of fact, we are. Looks like the boss is home early." Sarah's heart leaped as she recognized the lead rider, Matthew, returning with his men ahead of schedule. Relief washed through her, but she kept her rifle steady, knowing the danger hadn't passed. Whitman cursed under his breath, clearly reassessing the shifting odds. By the time Matthew and his riders pulled up behind him, the balance of power had decisively changed. "Whitman," Matthew acknowledged coldly, dismounting and walking forward. His hand rested casually on his holstered pistol. "Unusual to find you paying social calls." Jasper Whitman's face darkened with barely contained rage, but he was pragmatic enough to recognize his position. "Just passing through, Zanetti, checking on that creek situation." "The creek situation is settled," Matthew replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "By law and by right. If you have further concerns, take them to the territorial court, but I warn you, a second frivolous lawsuit will only cost you more than the first." For a tense moment, it seemed Whitman might push the confrontation despite the unfavorable odds. But with a gesture to his men, he wheeled his horse around. "This isn't finished, Zanetti." "Yes, it is," Matthew countered firmly, "unless you want to find yourself facing charges of trespassing and attempted intimidation. My men will escort you to the property line." With murderous looks but no further words, Whitman and his hands departed, flanked by 4 of Matthew's cowboys to ensure their exit. As the immediate danger receded, Sarah felt her knees weaken with delayed reaction. She lowered the rifle, suddenly aware of how close they had come to violent confrontation. Matthew strode quickly to the porch, his expression a mixture of relief and concern as he took in Sarah's pale face and the weapon in her hands. "Are you all right?" she nodded, finding her voice. "We're fine." Just shaken. She searched his face, noting the fatigue etched there. You're back early, made good time with the herd, and the buyer was ready for us, he explained. Fortunate timing, it seems. His gaze lingered on her, something unspoken passing between them before he turned to Roy for a full account of Whitman's visit. The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of activity as the returning men settled back into the ranch routine. The planned celebration dinner went ahead, though with a subdued air given the morning's events. Sarah found little opportunity for private conversation with Matthew, who was occupied with securing the ranch against any further threats from the broken spur. It was late evening before she encountered him alone, once again on the porch that had become their unofficial meeting place. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ranch yard. You handled yourself well today, Matthew said by way of greeting. Not many would have stood their ground against Whitman and his men. Sarah leaned against the porch railing. This place is worth defending. Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. Have you been thinking about what we discussed before I left? I have, she confirmed, heart quickening. Every day, in fact. Matthew moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could sense his warmth in the cool night air. And have you reached any conclusions? Sarah turned to face him fully. I have, she said again, gathering her courage. I'd like to stay, Matthew, not just for the land opportunity, though that's part of it, but because in these weeks at Monarch Ranch I've found something I wasn't expecting. What's that? He asked softly, though his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. A place that feels like it could be home, Sarah replied, and people who matter to me, one person in particular. The admission hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful. Matthew's expression softened, the usual reserve giving way to undisguised hope. I was afraid you'd be gone when we returned, he confessed. That Wyoming's promise would outweigh anything I could offer. Sarah shook her head. Wyoming was a dream born of necessity, a place to start over because I couldn't imagine continuing where I was. But here. She gestured to the ranch around them. Here I've found not just a new beginning, but a purpose, work that matters, people who have become dear to me. She met his gaze directly, and a man I've grown to care for deeply. Matthew reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The touch was respectful but intimate, a bridge between what they had been to each other and what they might become. I never expected to find someone like you, Sarah, he said, his voice rough with emotion. After Alina died, I thought that chapter of my life was closed forever. I built this ranch, expanded it, made it successful, but something was missing. And now, she asked, hardly daring to breathe, now I find myself looking forward to each day in a way I haven't for years. Wondering what you'll think of a new idea for the ranch, watching how you've brought Martha back to her old self, seeing how even Jeb opens up around you. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. I'm not asking you to forget Thomas, that wouldn't be right or possible. Nor am I asking you to forget Alina, Sarah replied. They'll always be part of who we are. Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. But perhaps we can honor their memory by building something new together, something they would be proud to see. The proposition was offered with such gentle certainty that Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, not tears of grief, but of a hope so unexpected and precious that it overwhelmed her. I'd like that very much, she whispered. Under the vast Colorado sky, with the ranch stretching around them like a promise of all that might be, Matthew drew her gently into his arms. The embrace was tentative at first, then sure as Sarah relaxed against him, feeling for the first time in months that she had found her place in the world. We'll take it slowly, he murmured against her hair. Get to know each other properly, build the foundation before we raise the house. Sarah smiled at the construction metaphor, so typical of this thoughtful, deliberate man who had unexpectedly captured her heart. I'd like that, she agreed. Though I should warn you, once I set my mind to something, I can be quite determined. Matthew's chuckle rumbled through his chest against her cheek. I've noticed. It's one of the things I admire most about you. The admission warmed her as they stood together, looking out over the land that would be their shared future. The months that followed brought changes both subtle and profound to Monarch Ranch. True to their agreement, Sarah and Matthew proceeded with careful deliberation in their relationship, taking time to know each other fully as individuals before making permanent commitments. Sarah wrote to her family in Illinois, explaining her change in plans. Their reply was cautiously supportive, her father expressing a desire to meet the man who had so altered his daughter's trajectory. Matthew, upon reading the letter, immediately suggested they invite her parents to visit once travel conditions improved in the fall. "Your father sounds like a man I'd respect," he told her one evening as they reviewed plans for converting a portion of the eastern acreage to cropland. "Anyone who raised a daughter with your intelligence and courage must be remarkable." Sarah smiled at the compliment. "He taught me that being a woman didn't mean limiting my mind. Mother worried it would make me unmarriageable, though Thomas disproved that theory." "As would I, given the chance," Matthew replied with a meaningful look that sent warmth spreading through her chest. By summer's end, that chance came. On a perfect September evening, with the ranch's harvest safely gathered and the autumn cattle sales successfully completed, Matthew took Sarah riding to the eastern section of the property, the area he had first mentioned as potential farmland for her. They crested a gentle hill to find a breathtaking view of the valley below, where a small creek wound through fertile soil. Wildflowers still bloomed in patches, painting the landscape with splashes of color. "It's beautiful," Sarah said as they dismounted to enjoy the vista. "It has potential," Matthew agreed, ever the practical rancher even in romantic moments. "Good water access, protection from the northern winds, soil that would support a variety of crops." Sarah smiled at his assessment. "You sound like you've given it considerable thought." "I have," he admitted. Then, taking her hands in his, he continued more softly, "But not just as farmland, Sarah. I've been thinking of it as a home site." Her heart quickened as she realized the significance of his words. A home site. Matthew nodded, suddenly looking less like the confident ranch owner and more like a man venturing into uncertain territory. "I thought perhaps, if you were willing, we might build a house here, something that's truly ours, not just an extension of what came before." The meaning was clear: a new beginning, honoring the past but not bound by it, a symbol of their shared future. "Matthew," she began, emotion making her voice unsteady, "are you asking?" He released her hands only to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a simple gold band. "I am," he confirmed. "Sarah James, these past months have shown me that life can offer second chances to those brave enough to take them. You've brought joy back to Monarch Ranch and to my heart. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" In that moment, with the Colorado sun painting the landscape in hues of gold and the man she had come to love looking at her with such open hope, Sarah felt the final pieces of her heart mend and reshape themselves into something new and strong. "Yes," she answered, voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will." Their wedding took place in October, a joyous celebration that brought together the entire ranch community and visitors from as far as Bentonville and Denver. Sarah's parents made the journey from Illinois, her father forming an immediate bond with Matthew over their shared interest in agricultural innovations, while her mother and Martha became fast friends discussing the domestic management of the expanding ranch. True to their plan, Matthew and Sarah began construction on their new home on the eastern parcel, while maintaining the original ranch house as the center of operations. The design incorporated elements they both valued: Matthew's preference for solid construction, and Sarah's eye for creating warm, welcoming spaces. Martha, who had initially worried she might be displaced by Sarah's presence, found herself elevated to a position of even greater responsibility, overseeing the domestic affairs of the growing enterprise, as Sarah divided her attention between the household and developing the new farmland. "You've given this place new life," Martha told Sarah on the evening before her wedding. "Not just for Matthew, but for all of us." By the following spring, the new house was completed, and Sarah had successfully planted her first crops on what was now referred to as the East Farm. The wheat and corn thrived under her knowledgeable care, vindicating her agricultural decisions and promising a bountiful first harvest. As May flowers bloomed across the Colorado landscape, Sarah and Matthew stood on the porch of their new home, his arm wrapped securely around her waist as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you'd continued to Wyoming?" Matthew asked, curious rather than concerned. Sarah considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with regret. I think we make the best decisions we can with the information we have at the time. My decision to stay here was the right one, I know that in my heart." Matthew pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I thank God for it every day, and for the broken horseshoe that brought you to Monarch Ranch." "The what?" Sarah asked, turning in his embrace to look at him. A smile played at the corners of Matthew's mouth. "I never told you." Jeb confessed months later. "When he first examined your mare, he found a loose shoe but nothing that would have prevented her from traveling. He removed it entirely and told you she needed rest because he thought you looked like you needed rest too." Sarah's eyes widened. "That manipulative young matchmaker," Matthew finished for her, laughing. "He claims he saw the way I looked at you that first night and decided to give fate a helping hand. Remind me to both scold him and thank him next time we see him," Sarah said, shaking her head in amazement at how small decisions could alter the course of a life. As twilight deepened around them, Sarah leaned into her husband's embrace, profoundly grateful for the detour that had brought her to this place, not the Wyoming homestead she had planned, but something far richer. A home filled with love, purpose, and the promise of a future built together. Monarch Ranch continued to flourish under their joint stewardship, the cattle operation expanding alongside the new farming venture. In December, their joy multiplied with news that their family would grow. Sarah was expecting their first child in the summer. Matthew received the news with overwhelming emotion, holding Sarah as if she were the most precious treasure on earth. "I never thought I'd have this chance again," he whispered against her hair. "A family, a future, a love that feels like coming home." Sarah understood completely. The road that had brought her to Monarch Ranch had been marked by loss and grief, yet had led to a happiness deeper than she had dared to imagine when setting out from Illinois as a widow with uncertain prospects. "Home," she repeated, the word encompassing all they had built together, not just the structures and the successful enterprise, but the bonds of affection and trust that had transformed two wounded hearts into something stronger than either had been alone. In July 1874, their daughter Eleanor Martha Zanetti was born, named for the woman whose vision had first shaped Monarch Ranch, and the housekeeper whose wisdom had helped guide Sarah and Matthew toward each other. The child had her father's dark hair and her mother's determined spirit, evident from her first strong cries. As Sarah cradled their daughter on the porch of the home they had built together, with Matthew beside her and the ranch spreading out before them like a living promise, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, not to the solitary homestead she had planned, but to a ranch full of what she had most needed: purpose, community, and hearts as hungry for connection as her own had been. "What are you thinking?" Matthew asked, his voice tender as he watched his wife and daughter. Sarah smiled, the contentment in her eyes reflecting the fullness of her heart. "I'm thinking that sometimes the best destinations aren't the ones we set out to find." Matthew nodded, understanding completely as he gathered his family close beneath the vast Colorado sky, the same sky that had witnessed their separate journeys of loss, their unexpected convergence at Monarch Ranch, and now the shared path they walked together. In finding each other, they had both found home,